As this Orioles free fall continues, fans have been calling for something to change. And the Orioles certainly did change something kind of major on Wednesday with the move to DFA Craig Kimbrel. But unfortunately, that's not going to help the offense. And the O's suffered another loss. I'll recap the game and the roster move coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast.
You are Locked On Orioles, your daily Baltimore Orioles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, Orioles fans. Today is Thursday, September 19th, 2024, and welcome back into the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Connor Newcomb. And coming up on today's episode, we're going to recap another Orioles loss as they fall 5-3 to the San Francisco Giants on Wednesday night. I'll get you the 5 things you need to know from that one, including the bats showing a little more life, but kind of going back to where they were a couple of weeks ago where they get runners on and can't get the big hit. We'll talk about Dean Kremer having a pretty good start, except for whatever in the world happened in that 4th inning. And then we'll get to the big news pregame on Wednesday. The Orioles kind of finally made the decision that has been thrown around a bit for the last couple of months. Craig Kimbrel designated for assignment as it just got too tough to watch for the Orioles with the veteran out there. We'll break down that move, plus some injury updates, some positive injury updates for some of those O's who could come back soon. But that's all coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast, which is brought to you by FanDuel. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started today. So we begin with another Orioles loss. Their 3rd in a row. They are now 2-8 in their last 10 games. And the final score from Oriole Park at Camden Yards on Wednesday night is the San Francisco Giants 5 and the Orioles 3. The O's are now 84-68 on the season. Stavy throws out the first pitch. It's Bark in the Park night. Those are 2 gigantic vibe boosters usually, and they still could not get the Orioles over the hump. As we kind of dart around the out-of-town scoreboard and the games that matter to the O's, Mariners and Yankees about to begin with first pitch in Seattle in a few moments here as I'm recording. We know that one is big for the Orioles. Twins 4, Guardians 3, bottom 10. O's hoping that Cleveland can come back in this one. Keep you updated on that. And the Tigers continue to roll, leading the Royals 4-1 in the 6th inning. If the Tigers win again, the Orioles' magic number will remain at 6 for a playoff spot. But let's turn our attention to the loss on Wednesday. 5 things you need to know from the O's loss to the Giants as they've now lost the first 2 games of this series. And the first thing you need to know is, well, the Orioles offense at least did something early and had 1 crooked number inning, which is something they haven't done very much recently. The 3rd inning, it was kind of all good signs for the O's. Emmanuel Rivera starts with a leadoff walk against Hayden Birdsong, who is a rookie righty who has incredible stuff, but sometimes he just does not know where it's going. We saw flashes of both of those things in his start for the Giants on Wednesday night. But then Jackson Holliday absolutely scorches a single with the runner going into right field, puts runners on the corners with nobody out. I mean, he hit that ball 103 off the bat, which was great to see. And then James McCann coming through with one of the bigger Oriole hits in a while, hits a ball to right field. It looked like off the bat. Okay, nice job, James. That's a sac fly to right. That ties this game at 1. Instead, the ball keeps floating and floating and floating, and Mike Yastrzemski jumping into the wall, not able to make the catch. Run scores, RBI double, 1-1 game. 2nd and 3rd, no outs. And yeah, the Orioles could have ended up scoring more. Gunnar Henderson strikes out, but with the infield back, Cedric Mullins did something that the Orioles have not been able to do, and that's just bring in a run when the teams are giving it to you. He grounds out to second, an RBI grounder that gives the O's a 2-1 lead. They would only get the 2 in the inning, and you could argue they could have and should have gotten more. But a 2-run inning where you get, a hit with runner in scoring position, a productive run scoring out with runners in scoring position, not things the O's have done lately. Those felt like good signs. They were really making Birdsong work. They made him throw 30 pitches in that 2-run 3rd inning. There was a lot of 3-ball counts, a lot of full counts the Orioles were running. Those were all good signs. But the second thing you need to know from this loss is that the Orioles did not convert after that. They only scored once more, and it continues the stretch of just basically scoring about 3 runs a game. It was 7 hits. They did draw 3 walks. They were hit by a pitch. They got way more base runners on than we really saw in that Tiger series or when they were just flummoxed by Blake Snell on Tuesday night. And you would expect a team to do better against Hayden Birdsong than against Blake Snell. And that is exactly what happened for the Orioles. They hit the ball hard, which is a really good sign. They haven't been doing a lot of that. 10 hard hit balls against Hayden Birdsong in the 5 2/3 innings that the rookie righty threw. That was really nice to see. They got 3 more of them over the rest of the game. 13 hard hit balls, one of the higher totals for the O's in a while. The at-bats were way better. The approach was way better. They took better swings. You look at the final line and they did end up with 7 strikeouts, which is still a pretty low number. But early in that game, Birdsong only had 3 of those. They were not swinging, missing a whole lot. Those were all good signs, but they just couldn't get one more big hit. And it was good to see Ryan O'Hearn, little RBI double off a lefty to cut it to 5-3 in the 6th. Brandon Hyde leaving him in there to face a left-hander, and he came through, which was good to see. But then they got first and third with 2 outs. And against the tough lefty, throws almost 100 in Eric Miller. Brandon Hyde pinch hits Austin Slater for Jackson Holliday in that spot. First and third, 2 outs, down by 2 in the 6th. And I know that caused quite the ruckus last time Brandon Hyde pinch hit Slater for Holliday, but the way that Holliday's been swinging it, the way Slater's been hitting well against lefties and been, honestly, with this terrible stretch, one of the Orioles' better hitters since they acquired him. I didn't mind that pinch hit spot at all. And then Slater just struck out. And then came really the biggest spots of the game. Bottom 7, James McCann walks, Gunnar singles to lead off the inning. First and second, nobody out. You're down by 2. You're like, this is the chance. Cedric strikes out. Santander grounds into a force out. You got first and third, 1 out. And then it was just another one of those things where it's like, even the luck is not going the Orioles' way. An 0-2 pitch to Heston Kjerstad bounces near his feet. If it does not hit him, it easily skips away for a wild pitch. It brings a run home, makes it 5-4, gets the tying run to second base, and maybe changes this game a little bit. Instead, it just barely clips his foot. So it is a hit by pitch. He gets on base to load the bases, but it doesn't bring a run home. And bases loaded, 2 outs. Colton Cowser hits a ball hard. Unfortunately, that wall's pretty far back there and hits it just in front of the track in left field for a fly out to leave him loaded. And it was just another case where they couldn't get the hit. And again, the swings were better. They were hitting the ball much harder. Cowser hit the ball hard right there, but they just could not get that hit once again. And the glass half full is that they're on the upswing because they're back to where they were 2 weeks ago, where they were getting a lot of base runners and hitting the ball harder and just not bringing them home. They are not doing what they were doing for the past week, which was like, hey, we weren't even getting any base runners to start with to try and bring home with runners in scoring position. But it just continues, and it was a step forward. You can't argue that. Much better at bats, but we're at the point of the season where the hard hit balls and the approaches are not going to outweigh the results, and you can't keep losing games. And that's what happened with another, just however way you look at it, unlucky or not, bad night for the Oriole offense. Now, the third thing you need to know from this one is that Dean Kremer was honestly mostly good in this start. I know you don't love his final line. So it was 6 innings, 5 runs, 4 earned on 7 hits, 7 Ks, no walks, 2 homers on 86 pitches for the Oriole right-hander, 7 hard hit balls by the Giants against him. Really kind of a weird start. So, of course, for the second straight night, our old friend Mike Yastrzemski hits a leadoff home run. This one on the first pitch delivered by Dean Kremer. It's 1-0 Giants. Felt like this Orioles team that there's nothing they needed more than to just get a 1-0 lead. And no chance to do that because the Giants lead 1-0 after 1 pitch. But then Kremer really settled in the next 3 innings. He was fantastic, was dominant, was throwing the splitter out there. Throughout the start, it was a really interesting pitch mix. He threw 26 splitters. He had a pretty even mix among his 5 pitches, through all of them at least 10 times. But 26 splitters, it was his most used pitch. Next most was 19 sinkers, and that's a new pitch for him. He got 6 whiffs on it. It was a big-time strikeout pitch for Kremer. I was really impressed by that splitter. And then the sinker, how about that sinker? 9 called strikes with it, 84% in-zone rate for the sinker. And it's not like Kremer was throwing it down the middle. He was dotting the corners pretty consistently with that sinking fastball. I was really impressed by Kremer's stuff. It continues this run. Last 5 or 6 starts, he's been, Zach Eflin's been great, but I think Kremer's maybe been the Orioles' second best starter over the last month or so. I mean, he's been really, really good despite getting hit on the wrist by that line drive in Colorado. Just didn't miss a beat and continues to pitch well. But you're wondering, Connor, how did he pitch well if he gave up 5 runs, 4 earned? Well, that takes us to the disaster of the 4th inning. 4th thing you need to know from this loss. That 4th inning made all the difference. Now, Kremer didn't start it off well. He hung a breaking ball to Elliot Ramos, and he singled to lead off the inning. Then he gets behind 3-1 to Michael Conforto, and Conforto hits a ground ball. If he hits it a little bit to the left, it's a ground ball double play. Instead, it sneaks into right field, so it's first and second, nobody out. Tyler Fitzgerald, crazy fast, lays down a bunt, beats it out at first. All of a sudden, you got bases loaded and no outs. And you're thinking, okay, it's a 2-1 lead. Just find a way to give up a run, keep it tied, get out of the inning. And it looked like with the next batter that the Orioles were going to do that. Kremer makes a really good pitch, and it was Grant McCray who hit just kind of a little dribbler up the third baseline. Kremer does a fantastic job to get to the ball quickly, field it, flips it home in time. McCann covering the plate. All right. Huge first force out at home. The run doesn't score. Now you hunt the double play with the next batter. Instead, that's not what happened because the umpire called him safe. And you're like, the ball beat him by a mile. How is he safe? Well, the Orioles don't challenge, and Masson shows the replay. James McCann's foot was not on home plate. There was about 2 inches of dirt between McCann's foot and that big white home plate, and the runner slid in safely. Now, I am doing this podcast, and I get it that people think I might be a little too positive, a little too glass half full. The way I watch this game of baseball, because it is so difficult, is if, you are sticking with your approach and just the results aren't coming, you're struggling to hit, you're struggling to pitch a little bit, whatever it may be, you're just getting beat. Yeah, those things are frustrating, but they don't send me over the edge because baseball is a hard game and sometimes you get in a rut. Now, this is quite a slump the O's are in. We know that. But this is still a team with talent that is sticking to their guns and is trying to work out of this. Even errors, they're annoying, but they happen in the field of play, in the game of baseball. Little things like this, where you can make big plays to get big outs and you just hand them away. And it was called an error on McCann, and that's why one of the runs that Kremer gave up ended up being unearned. It was because of that play. But that's not like, ground ball to short, you biff it, you don't get the out. That is just lack of attention to detail. In a big spot at home plate, just put your foot on the plate and you've got a huge first out. Instead, next batter, 2-run single, Giants take the lead. Now, Kremer did a good job because it was still first and second, no outs, rolling a double play, getting another grounder, getting out of the inning, keeping it just a 4-2 game. Impressive by him to not let that thing completely spiral. But that was the inning that won the game for the Giants. And even if they get that out, the next batter, Schmidt, he laced a 2-run single in the left field. So even if they get the out, he probably still hits that. The Giants still take a 3-2 lead in that inning. But even then, you can't do things like that at any time, and especially when you're in this bad of a rut and you are desperate for a win. It just, that sent me over the edge a little bit. I had to walk away and take a little lap after that one. I think that's the emotion a lot of us are feeling right now watching the Orioles. Like, what? That was my reaction. What? It is what it is. Yeah. Fifth and final thing you need to know from this one, at least the bullpen was good. For the second straight night, it didn't really matter. Remember, Burt Smith and Keegan Aiken were incredible on Tuesday before Craig Kimbrel did what he did. Then Wednesday, 3 scoreless from the Orioles pen after Kremer left the game. Combination of Gregory Soto, Matt Bowman, and Jacob Webb all pitched well to keep it a 5-3 game. They did their job again, just like the pitching's been doing for a long time now, continuing to just give the O's offense chance after chance to have the big inning, and they couldn't do it. Nice to see Webb put up his first scoreless outing as well since returning from the injured list. But the only bad bullpen outing in this series so far, despite the Orioles' 2 losses, has been Craig Kimbrel, and it was tough. I talked about it on yesterday's episode, that disaster of a 9th inning in low leverage on Tuesday night, the scenes at Camden Yards, it was rough. And turned out that was his final appearance in Oriole uniform. The Orioles, they pulled the string, designating Craig Kimbrel for assignment on Wednesday. We'll talk about why the O's finally came to that decision, what it means for the O's roster moving forward. That is coming up next. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is brought to you by Arena Club. For most of us that like collecting cards, the idea of spending $2,000 or more on like an Elly De La Cruz rookie card, that's not in the cards. I like collecting cards, but that's some serious money to drop. Well, thanks to slab packs from arenaclub.com, now it's possible to score gem mints for a fraction of their retail price. Every card that's listed was hit from last week's Arena Club slab pack drop. Arena Club is the only repack that provides real value, a complete view of all possible cards, and clear hit rates for each one. Whether you are buying, whether you're selling, trading, displaying, Arena Club is the card collecting platform that you have to check out. And their grading process is accurate, it's fast, and it's transparent. You got to love all those things. And right now, you can get 10% off your first slab pack or card purchase by going to arenaclub.com/lockedonmlb and use code LOCKEDONMLB. That's arenaclub.com/lockedonmlb, code LOCKEDONMLB for 10% off your first purchase. So the O's lost again. Yeah, I don't know what to say at this point. I can tell you why they're losing the singular games, what's going wrong in those. They're doing weird plays like the James McCann at home plate, but overall, this bad stretch, the 2-8, the not hitting, I only have so many answers. I kind of throw my hands up as well. Like, you just got to find a way. Now, one sliver of good news, the Guardians walked it off against the Twins. So that's good for the Orioles. The Twins sitting in that final wild card spot right now. It's always good when you're struggling that the teams below you are losing as well. So that a good sign. Brian Rocchio with the walk-off in the bottom of the 10th. We'll get a score update. Tigers still leading 4-1 in the 7th in that game as well. But for the Orioles, yeah, it's not been good. And the worst part's been the offense. The pitching has been pretty good for most people besides Craig Kimbrel. And Kimbrel just kind of been a disaster of a second half. And he had the worst outing of his career Tuesday. Came into a game, O's down 4-0, top of the 9th, low leverage spot. Just get him some work, get him some confidence. Maybe throws up a 0. And instead, he allowed 6 earned runs in 2/3 of an inning and had to come out of the game. 6 earned runs in any outing, the most of Kimbrel's career. And I talked about it on yesterday's episode. I was in the ballpark Tuesday, kind of broke down how, I felt at this point, okay, Kimbrel, the Orioles are just going to leave him off the playoff roster. It's not worth giving him a playoff roster spot. I know he still has solid stuff. I know he still has high strikeout rates, but it's like he can't get guys out consistently. You can't put him on a postseason roster. I mentioned that I think at this point, with how long into the season, they would keep him around for the last 2 weeks, maybe pitch him in like 2 of the final 11 games in super low leverage, and then just leave him off the playoff roster, cut your ties, say goodbye, let him walk in free agency. But I can also see why the Orioles made the move that they did. And on Wednesday, the Orioles announced that they had designated Craig Kimbrel for assignment. Effectively, the process of releasing him from this roster, they called up Brian Baker to join the bullpen in his place. And that's the other thing about it. Like, it's Brian Baker. It's not like there was this young stud arm knocking on the door to take his spot. They just had to cut their losses and call up Brian Baker because they felt right now he gives the Orioles a better chance to win. And honestly, they're not wrong. I mean, Brian Baker at this point, with how bad Kimbrel's been, is maybe a slight upgrade for the Oriole bullpen. And we were at the point where even if it was just 4-0 down in the 9th, like, I'm not trusting Craig Kimbrel to get out. I mean, I'm not trusting Craig Kimbrel to even put up a 0, even if it's a hard one where you walk a couple of batters and you get out of a jam. Like, he really hasn't done it. At least Brian Baker can put up a 0 for you every once in a while. So Baker will come back, 21 innings on the year in the big leagues, 4.71 ERAs. It was okay in a couple big league stints. AAA's had a really high strikeout rate, 32%, but a 5+ ERA in 31 innings with a high walk rate. But since the Orioles last optioned him to AAA back on August 17th, so he was basically back down in AAA for about a month before being recalled on Wednesday, he was really good in that month. 7 1/3 innings, 2 runs, 5 hits, 12 strikeouts, just 2 walks. Those 2 runs were both in his last outing, but that was on September 13th, 6 days ago. So he's very well rested whenever Brandon Hyde, if he does call on him. out of the Oriole bullpen. Now, I thought maybe it would be Colin Selby, who we saw be really good in those 2 outings with the O's before going back to AAA, that would replace Kimbrel, but Selby is in Baltimore. He is currently on the taxi squad, so he might be activated soon. I think it was Baker because the O's think Danny Coulombe is pretty close to returning. So you just get Baker here for a few days, and then you easily just send Baker back down to AAA maybe this weekend if that's when Danny Coulombe is ready to return. Selby seems like more of a guy you bring up for a little more of the long haul, but he is in Baltimore, so maybe there is some other roster move they're thinking about making to get him back on the roster. But back to Kimbrel, it's just a sad way for it to end for Craig Kimbrel. I mean, everything changed that final game before the All-Star break, that crazy game against the Yankees when Kimbrel came in and he gave up the 3-run homer to Ben Rice in the top of the ninth to blow the save. And then Alex Verdugo in the bottom of the ninth fell down in left field, and Mullins walked it off for a huge win for the O's to keep them in first place over the Yankees heading into the All-Star break. Doesn't that seem like a long, long time ago that happened? But up to that point, before that game, that Sunday before the break, Kimbrel had been pitching like an all-star closer. In fact, I felt he was an all-star snub. I couldn't believe Clay Holmes made the all-star team over him. That's how good he had been. 34 and a third innings up to that point. Kimbrel had a 2.10 ERA with a 39% strikeout rate, one of the best in baseball, and a 10% walk rate. I mean, that is like all caps Craig Kimbrel. That was the pitcher he was in the first half. He was really, really good. It felt like the O's had gotten a great replacement for Felix Bautista. He was looking like Dominic Kimbrel, pitching really, really well. And then he had that blown save, and he came back out in the second half, and he blew some more, and it just was a downhill spiral since then. And you can tell how much less the Orioles trusted him because he had 34 innings in the first half and just the 18 innings since then, counting that blown save against the Yankees in the final game before the break. Here are Kimbrel's stats to end the year since then. 18 innings of work, an 11.50 ERA with a 22% strikeout rate and an 18% walk rate with 5 home runs allowed. In that stretch, he threw 19 games, 18 innings over 19 games. He only had one clean 1-2-3 inning, just one of them. Funny enough, it was in low leverage, but it was against the Dodgers of all teams, like maybe the best lineup he faced in that stretch. He gets the 1-2-3, which you got to appreciate that. That's a little bit funny. He allowed at least one earned run in 11 of those 19 final appearances with the Orioles, and many of them multiple runs, including the disaster that was Tuesday night. It was just not good. Not only had he lost his velocity, he used to be 95 the last couple of years. He was down to like 92, 93 with the fastball. He was struggling to locate it at the top of the zone where that spin rate and that IVB plays so well. So he was getting hit harder. He was just getting hit hard all season, but when he was in the middle of the plate, he was getting hit even harder. He was losing command. He was walking more and more guys. He was trying to incorporate more sweepers and changeups and just couldn't find the right mix. And he was just kind of cooked. And he's had what I think, and he'll be an interesting case, but what I think is a Hall of Fame career. And guys want to go out on top, and not everybody gets a chance to go out on top. But some guys, even if they don't go out on the top of their game, go out respectable. And this is how crazy it is for Kimbrel. Like, he was, as I said, had one of the best first halves for him in a while, what he did pre-All-Star break for the Orioles. I think he deserved to be an All-Star, but was just unpitchable in the second half. And maybe somebody still gives him another 1-year contract next year. It's not going to be the Orioles, but maybe they see what he did in the first half and think it's still in there. But I don't know if you can see how he just completely broke down in the second half of the season and want to give him a major league deal. And Kimbrel, another reliever, might take a minor league deal. I bet teams would offer him a minor league deal, might take it, compete for a roster spot in spring training. I don't think Craig Kimbrel is taking a minor league deal. I think if there's no major league offers on the table, Kimbrel's probably hanging it up this offseason, and that seems like what it's going to be. And it's sad for him. An incredible career, one of the best relievers, if not the best reliever in baseball for almost a decade, really. And just to see it fall apart like this. And even last year, like, everybody gave him flack for his tough playoffs, but he was really good in the regular season for most of the year for the Phillies. Like, he didn't really break down at all until October. Well, it happened much earlier this year. And I don't fully fault the Orioles for bringing him in, especially with how good he was in the first half. You wanted that veteran stopgap closer. It ended up not working in the long term. He also didn't end up being as much of a problem down the stretch because the O's pitching had been good. It's been the offense that has completely deserted them. So I feel like we've talked about Craig Kimbrel a little less lately just because that hasn't been the issue of this team as they've struggled. But it's just, I feel for him, man. It is a sad, sad way to what I think is going to be the last. I mean, that might be the last big league game he pitches in. Gives up 6 runs in 2/3 of an inning in a low leverage spot against the San Francisco Giants. Like, that is not how he wanted to end it. We'll see. Maybe he can catch on again with another team next year. But yeah, it's an Orioles tenure we'll talk about more in the offseason. But just, it was a sad scene being in the park, seeing him walk off the mound on Tuesday night. And you did get a little bit of a feeling like this could be the end. And the Orioles did decide that basically, hey, we've kept him around. We tried to work with him. We tried to get him back to the old Kimbrel. And it was just time to cut their losses. I think the Orioles have known for a couple of weeks they weren't going to put him on the playoff roster, but they were hoping they could get something from him in the regular season. I think Tuesday was when it became perfectly clear they weren't getting anything from him in the regular season either. And, they were saying these final 11 games are uber important for us. Let's at least call up something that Brandon Hyde could maybe consider using in somewhat of a close game in Brian Baker versus Kimbrel, which he was absolutely not going to get anywhere near that spot by putting him in the game. So it makes Hyde's job a little easier and makes the bullpen a little bit better by making this move. And that's what it's about. It's about winning baseball games right now. And that's where the O's came to this decision. But with that roster move made, hopefully it is not the final roster move the Orioles make this week, because getting some positive injury news continuing. Orioles already got Jacob Webb and Heston Kjerstad back on Sunday. Might get some more guys back over the next week. We'll talk about that coming up next to finish off the pod. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is also brought to you by FanDuel. Now, you've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel. It's America's #1 sports book, but we've got something a little different for you. Now, through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then, with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. You get to watch the football on Sundays, multiple weeks, and play some wagers on the games over at FanDuel. It's a pretty good combination right there. So just visit FanDuel.com to download America's #1 sportsbook. So we finish things off with a couple of Orioles injury updates here with Mike Elias and then Brandon Hyde talking to the media over the past few days to get some positive updates. So Jordan Westburg took batting practice on the field for the first time before Tuesday's game. Mike Elias said he expects Westburg back in the regular season, and then he backed it up with big news on Wednesday. Jordan Westburg is heading to Norfolk today, and here on Thursday will start a rehab assignment in AAA Norfolk. That is huge news for the O's, that he could be back before the regular season is over. That is gigantic. Now, Elias also said that Ramon Urias and Ryan Mountcastle, Jordan Westburg had the broken hand, Urias with the sprained ankle, Mountcastle with the, whatever that arm injury was where he kind of jammed it sliding. They're both in line, Elias said, to return in the regular season. Urias was running on the field on Tuesday, and now Urias is going to join Westburg on that AAA rehab assignment Thursday in Norfolk. Mountcastle, not so much, although Elias did say Mountcastle still could go on rehab soon. Now, Norfolk's season ends on Sunday, so there's not a lot of time to do rehab, but maybe Saturday or Sunday, Mountcastle can get a couple of games down there. That is all good news, because this could be a boost to this Orioles offense. You get Jordan Westburg back in there. He's your everyday third baseman. I mean, honestly, you get Ramon Urias back in there, you might be in a spot where your infield is Westburg, Henderson, Urias with a little bit of Jackson Holiday sprinkled in there every day. And, as much as they've given the O's, you're not sending Emmanuel Rivera and Kobe Mayo and Levon Soto out there as much, and you get more of your regulars back. And especially for Westburg, getting him back into the groove of playing every day for at least 4, 5, 6 days before the postseason starts, that would be a huge boost for him to kind of settle back in and maybe provide a spark for this Orioles offense. Now, unfortunately, on the flip side, no further updates on Grayson Rodriguez. The AAA season, as I mentioned, ends Sunday, so he's run out of time to make a true rehab start. You don't need to make one. Like, he can just still throw in other ways to get ready, but the rehab starts are a great way to get into actual game action before you have to pitch when it matters. And it can be tough to not go on rehab and come back to the big leagues. Guys have done it before, but there's a reason why most guys go on rehab assignments to get back into that game fill. He's still throwing side sessions, but Elias said, quote, "Time and the calendar are not exactly our friend here," when referring to Grayson Rodriguez coming back. he could be back in some sort of relief role. Elias didn't shut down that possibility on Tuesday, but this timeline, I'm not feeling great about the chances of Grayson Rodriguez even pitching again for the Orioles in 2024, especially if they don't make, any kind of deep playoff run. I don't know. I feel like coin flip right now if Grayson even returns to this team. Now, pitchers that could return, one is Danny Coulombe. He has now thrown 3 rehab outings in AAA, threw a scoreless inning on Sunday, and then threw another one in game 1 of the Tides doubleheader on Wednesday. It was kind of a weird one. He went out there, he retired the first 2 batters, then he gave up a 2-out single. He had thrown only 8 pitches, and then Buck Britton took him out of the game. There was no trainer, there was no injury, it looked like, and Coulombe looked a little perplexed as I was watching the video that he was coming out, but maybe it was just the plan was for him to only pitch to 3 batters. Now, the breaking stuff still looks good. His velocity is still down at 88, 89. Now, he doesn't throw super hard, but you'd like him closer to his normal 90 to 91 with the 4-seamer and the sinker. Some of it could just be there's more adrenaline in the big leagues and your velo gets back to a regular spot. But Jacob Webb threw 4 rehab outings before returning. So Coulombe is at 3 now. So maybe the O's will want one more, but he could certainly return in this Tigers series at worst. I feel like if he feels fine, the O's will get Danny Coulombe back when they go to New York for that Yankee series next week, which again will be another huge boost to this bullpen. Speaking of that bullpen, we got finally the word on what was going on with Yennier Cano. It was some right forearm soreness that kept him out of that series in Detroit. But Cano has been now available in these 2 games against the Giants. There's not really a spot to throw him in there. And he said that he feels fine now. So that is a great sign. Him going down injured would just have been another gigantic blow to this team. And finally, speaking of pitching, Chase McDermott, who I kind of thought was done for the year, he went on the IL in late July in AAA Norfolk with a shoulder issue after, remember, he had come up and made that 1 spot start as his major league debut for the O's against the Marlins, then back to AAA, was having a really great season. I felt like he was done. He started game 1 of the doubleheader in Norfolk on Wednesday, returned through 3 scoreless hitless innings, 5 Ks, 3 walks. The breaking stuff and the changeup looked really good. The fastball effectiveness was there because it has that good spin rate, but the velocity was only 90 to 92 for McDermott. He's usually a mid-90s, running it up into the high 90s with that fastball, but it's his first outing back in a couple of months. Maybe he wasn't trying to push it with that shoulder issue he went on the IL with, and shoulders can zap your velo more than any kind of elbow issue does. But to be honest, like, he's pitching in a Norfolk game, he might be closer than Grayson Rodriguez to getting back on the field in the big leagues if the O's would want him. Now, I would have loved Chase McDermott. I talked about it a lot, to be some sort of DL Hall 2023 type bullpen weapon for the Orioles down the stretch. And maybe that could still happen because he's pitching. But I would think the O's wanted to build him into that role and have him be healthy a little bit more. They're not going to want to push him after that injury. So maybe he'll pitch an inning or 2 on Sunday for Norfolk and then just kind of call it a season, potentially throw some more in the fall, maybe go to the Arizona Fall League, but more than likely just make sure he gets himself healthy and ready for 2025. But those are all the injury updates. That's kind of the one positive I've got for you from this podcast, unless you're taking Kimbrel DFA as a positive as well. And then there's 2 positives for you here coming out of this one. The Orioles do play another baseball game today, though. That's, you can say the bad thing because they're tough to watch, or the good thing because another chance to win. And it's a little matinee to finish off this series. 1:05 start at Oriole Park. Logan Webb, the just innings eater, who does have a 3.53 ERA on the season, will take the hill against Zach Eflin, who's been tremendous since the Orioles acquired him. Here's one thing to note. The Orioles have been playing some bad baseball, but they have kind of started their sweepless streak again. Despite the record not being great and the hitting being terrible, the Orioles actually have not been swept in the second half of the season. The last time they were swept was by the Cubs, that series shortly before the All-Star break. So there's one thing that maybe we can hold out hope that they'll win one of these games, and hopefully it will be today. And that will be it for me this week on the podcast. I am headed up to Maine here on Thursday for a family wedding. Because of that, I will not be recording podcasts from Maine. So no Friday episode, no recap of the Thursday game. I'll be back on Monday, maybe talk a little bit about the final Giants-Orioles game, but more than likely it'll be mostly recapping what will be a gigantic series, Tigers at Orioles, for 3 games this weekend. I'll have that recap on Monday, and hopefully, because this is today not a game I'm going to talk about on a Friday episode, maybe that means the O's will win. Maybe I'll come back and the O's will be on a 4-game winning streak and they'll have clinched their playoff spot. That would be tremendous. Hopefully that happens. But either way, I'll be back Monday. Until then, I'm Connor Newcomb, and this has been the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.